Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency have reached an understanding on how to interact in the following the U.S.-Israeli regime launching attacks against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Iran's new agreement with the IAEA on the resumption of cooperation will remain valid as long as no hostile action is taken against the Islamic Republic, including reimposition of UN sanctions. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi calls the development a step in the right direction, which opens the door for diplomacy and stability. And this is the focus of our Spotlight program. First, here's our guests. Joining us, Mr. Reza Bedadi, academic, researcher, and author, joining us from London, and Batul Sobeiti, activist and political analyst, also joining us from London. Hello to the both of you, and welcome you both to our program here. Batul, I guess we'll start with you, do the gentlemanly thing, and start with Ms. Sobeiti. Your thoughts, Batul, on Iran's continued along this a very narrow and oftentimes fragile path of diplomacy when it comes to the IAEA, especially given what many critics view as its weaponization against Iran leading up to U.S. Israeli aggression against the country's nuclear facilities.
Yes, absolutely. Good evening to you and your guest. Iran is still negotiating with the IAEA, whilst the IAEA is still practicing deception against it. Decisions that come out of the IAEA and what determines its relationship with Iran has everything to do with the Western superpowers, of course, the head of which is America. That is the one in control of the IAEA. We can't look at the IAEA as an independent, impartial, or even technical organization. It's proven to be one that's political. We know that Israel also has massive influence on the IAEA through pressuring Iran, using this organization as a mere title to do so. And this is an indication to us that the politics of power is walking in the world. This world order is built on oppression and transgression. Even the terms and the institutions that the West itself creates, so for example, the UN, is culpable of that oppression. And the West ultimately created these institutions to secure its own interests. When it comes to Iran, it is very clear that the IAEA is the aggressor because it has no proof against Iran. And we know that in June, for example, the IAEA accused Iran in a very deceptive fashion that ultimately gave a kind of green light for the American aggression and paved the way for it. It kind of justified and garnered consent for it. So such an institution not only has no credibility, but I believe it's a threat on all other countries as it's based on the interests of the hegemonic superpowers that they want to pass. And Iran is still negotiating right now because, of course, it wants to avoid coming into direct clashes. We know that when Iran sits on the negotiating table, it defines certain titles like, sovereignty, rights, security, whilst negotiating, and it tries to obtain from the IAEA guarantees that throughout, no military actions will be taken against it. But of course, we know that that has no meaning because the West cannot be held to any of its guarantees. That doesn't mean that America will oblige and stick to their agreements. And of course, when I say the IAEA, I specifically mean America because, as I mentioned, they are the ones in control. And it's very important that Iran recognizes this.
Thank you, Batul, for your initial take there. And Reza, always a pleasure. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead, Reza, kick off with your initial thoughts on the level of caution required to deal with an agency that has been politicized against you, which has itself violated your confidence and confidentiality and played right into Batul's point, your adversary's plots, and is asking once again for cooperation.
Thank you, and thank you to your guest. I just want to remind us that no matter what agreement is signed, which the details will come out in the future, at the moment they haven't released the exact details, it can't be any more powerful and internationally recognized and internationally guaranteed than the JCPOA. And that was reso within a few years, ripped apart by the United States. Then it was not implemented by the European colonial powers. And then we have what we have today, which is some kind of a new agreement to guarantee Iran is not building a bomb on behalf of the IAEA, which, as my colleague rightly explained, is a tool and an agency of not the international community, but the Western powers, United States, European powers. Obviously, the foreign minister he's not able to sign something that hasn't been accepted by the Iranian authorities, Iranian people in position of accepting such an agreement. And we know that the parliament passed a law stating that nothing can be signed by the government, so by the foreign minister or by foreign ministry, without the supervision of the Iranian Supreme Security Council. So we have to see what the details are. And at the moment, this agreement isn't from what my understanding is, it doesn't provide access to the inspectors to come in and do as they want. I think this is the initial agreement for them to later on discuss. So we have to see what the agreement is in a few days' time or whenever the more details come out. But I think Iran is playing cautious. They try to maybe extend, or maybe what they're trying to do with this agreement is give the other side, which is the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, to have the snapback cancelled. But if it's cancelled, my question would be would the Europeans then extend it for another 6 months, which will then put Iran back in the same position for the next 6 months of having to pander to the Europeans and the United States again?
Good take, and you're very correct on that. There is no guarantees of what kind. There's no access agreed upon as of yet, Reza. It's basically an agreement that we're going to start our sit downs for more talks and negotiations to reach that level that you just alluded to. Okay, so Batul, this remark by Rafael Grossi, this today's meeting was a step in the right direction, which opens the door for diplomacy and stability. This was echoed also by the High Representative for the European Union on Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaya Kayas, who also said today's framework deal for resuming inspections of Iran's nuclear facilities could mark a crucial step for nuclear diplomacy, provided there is rapid implementation by Iran. My question to you, Batul, are they kidding? Iran was literally the only party involved in diplomacy. At the time, its nuclear installations were targeted by the U.S. and the Israelis. And U.S. was playing a role. Obviously, the IAEA was manufacturing pretexts, to your point earlier. And we know what the Israelis were doing, what they always do, sit back and metastasize.
Absolutely. And maybe also add the practicing of deception, which was key in all of this, and which paved the way for the initial strike. It is, but we also need to mention that Arakchi also said that it's possible for Iran to withdraw from this agreement if it is, tangibly proven that the IAEA practices deception this time round, which is, as we know, practiced from multiple fronts, for example, through spying. We know that it gave the information that America and Israel needed that eased the strikes, whether they were on the nuclear scientists, which was supported by intelligence information gathered from inside Iran by the IAEA. We also know through investigative journalists, the use of, hardware like Palantir for spying as well. The IAEA will continue to give intelligence information to the West. That won't change. Iran needs to deal with the IAEA on the same basis that it experienced in the past few months. Nothing has changed in this time period. Israel is still threatening to strike Iran as it pleases. And so we know that the IAEA will continue to reveal the secrets it obtains from Iran. The IAEA therefore needs to be regarded by Iran as a spy agent. Such a body, as we've also been mentioning, has given the excuse to strike and could do so again under the pretext of Iran not cooperating enough or supposed violations. Continuing negotiations with the IAEA is returning back to that same experience that Iran has tried and tested, and I believe been prey to the deception of. So deception can occur again, and Israel can strike Iran when it decides to. It is presumed that Iran, at any time that it negotiates now, is taking all of this into account, that this is yet again potentially another deception, and that it does its due diligence in this, to expect that the information it gives to the IAEA will be received by American Israel. And Iran should also expect that during these very negotiations, there could be another strike. And so the due diligence from a security and military perspective needs to be taken. We know that the West uses the IAEA as part of their trap of diplomacy, because the IAEA has nothing to do with Iran's relations with the West politically. Its job is supposed to be technical, but when it becomes a tool of political pressure, and Iran is very aware of this, and we know Iran in negotiating tables doesn't want to speak about other issues not related to nuclear or give into the false allegations, but that's been the case time and time again, that the IAEA acts on behalf of Western political interests and imposes their rules and their red lines on Iran. And so after this, it should be clear that Iran, in my opinion, should even refuse dealing with someone like Grossi and should stipulate someone different.
Thank you there, Batul. Now, Reza, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said this document and its continuation are conditional on no hostile action being taken against the Islamic Republic for Iran. For instance, if the so-called snapback mechanism is activated by the E3, namely the UK, France, and Germany, the implementation of this document will also be halted. So a lot of moving parts here, and you alluded to just a few moments ago, this could be an avenue to buy time to see how we're going to deal with the snapback mechanism for another 6 months or whatnot. But how do you see at this point in the game the E3 respecting this new arrangement? Do they give it time to develop?
They have two options really. They'll either say that Iran has to conclude the inspection aspect of the IAEA and Iran relationship within the 1 month time frame of end of August when they initiated the snapback, or if Iran says no, that's not enough time, we will need more, they will then go most probably the snapback mechanism by several months, so that it can still be held as a tool to pressure Iran later on. The idea of Iran that this is illegal, or the actual full process of and going through mediation and so forth before the snapback is triggered, that will then be kind of, I don't know if it will be valid anymore, that argument. So we'll have to see how Iran plays it. Has Iran kind of calculated both options, or are they expecting that there will be no 6 month extension, that it will end, because I think it's supposed to end in the middle of October, the snapback mechanism. It's really, I think only time will tell how this is going to progress. I do believe possibly Iran, because if you think where this deal was struck was in Egypt. So Iran is reaching out to Egypt, is trying to, with Egypt and these countries. And so they want to give Egypt having such an important deal done. But what the deal is for us to find out. And so maybe this is a smart 4D chess Iran is playing that we will find out soon what the outcome is.
Thank you there, Mr. Vedadi. And Batul, I want to put the same question to you because it's relatively important and applicable to this story. Snapback threat, it looms over all of this. The Europeans who did nothing to preserve the JCPOA post May of 2018, obviously when the Trump administration, Donald Trump, with an executive order, unilaterally opted the U.S. out of the agreement. A lot of people feel that the Europeans did nothing to earn the right or the jurisdiction to really speak on this. They have a lot to say about Iran's so-called non-compliance, right? A narrative riddled, you very well know, Batul, with contradictions. But anyway, nevertheless, do these three now, from your perspective, respect the due process of a re-engagement of Iran in the IAEA, sit back and let things develop?
They have no respect. America and the whole West by extension, so the European powers that are simply a tail of America, they do not respect or uphold agreements. And this has been proven time and time and time again. They practice deception in the midst of when they want to strike. So all of this has to do with what the interests dictate, not what guarantees stipulate. So we shouldn't look at it from the perspective of an agreement is signed, therefore, America, Israel, and of course the whole of the West consider themselves above any guarantees. I mean, what we see right now in the region is Israel acting as a rabid dog, completely unleashed, completely given the cover to do as it pleases, the open free hand by America, and the kind of media and, economical and security cover by the whole West as well, against even many Arab countries and against all fronts, going against all national agreements, which makes these sides not reliable to negotiate with at the first instance. So here we're talking about Iran being subject to a potential strike, let alone the reinstatement of these snap elections. And as you mentioned, the nuclear agreement of the JCPOA a decade ago was literally signed between Iran and the Western powers that the IAEA was a part of. And Iran did not go against its side of the agreement, but not only did America withdraw, but you also have the other Western powers that you're mentioning, the Troika, who didn't give Iran its right, nor followed what was expected of the agreement, whilst at the same time demanding Iran fulfills its side of the obligation. So we're talking about tried and tested parties over here. And then, of course, you had Iran that went above the enrichment levels, which was based on the West not fulfilling its side of the agreement. So that's always the case. They expect and demand Iran fulfills its side, whilst they don't fulfill their side. And then the situation becomes demanding from one side and expecting, as Trump put it, total submission from the other side. And we know that this all has to do with the fact that Iran is the only country that is not coerced by America, which, in my opinion, leaves Iran as a role model and example for rejecting hegemony globally, because no other country says no to American interests at the expense of its own nation.
Thanks, Batul. And Reza, I'd like to put that U.S. and Israeli, their manipulation, their behind-the-scenes stuff, the fact that we had Iranian leadership just a couple of days ago saying it seems like Israel's ramping up its nuclear arsenal, something that the West does not want to ever speak about, obviously. Okay, so they're always there. They're always pushing this line, always very busy. How, from your perspective, do you think they are digesting this new cooperation agreement between Tehran and the IAEA, and what kind of threat do you feel they pose to it?
With Israel and the United States and even the Europeans, I don't think these kind of agreements, they may use them as a cover, as my colleague stated. Even recently, recently, a few days ago, United States invites Hamas to accept a deal that it proposes, and then as the Hamas is discussing to accept such a deal, they allow the Israelis to strike in the capital of one of the closest allies in the region. The United States and the Israelis understand that the United States and Israel and Europe, they have a limited time to be able to turn back what they think is the swing of hegemony position. The rise of the BRICS, the rise of the Shanghai Cooperation. China only a few days ago, President Pezeshkian being at a parade that demonstrated China's superior military power and its economy and so forth. So the Americans and the Israelis know that their time is limited. So they've never been so violent before, so overtly. And so this is a demonstration not of their strength, but of their weakness and the fact that they are clinging to anything they can to try and prevent what's happening, which is the swing of power from the west to the east. And so maybe Iran is playing a smart game of prolonging it until they get past certain periods of time where it doesn't matter what they try to do, they will be out of the back mechanism. Okay. Iran's economy will be sufficient as it provides oil to China and so forth. So we have to see, only time can tell. But I think the United States and Israel are clinging really hard to maintain limited power and influence that they have. They're not as powerful as people think they are.
And well put, Reza. Thank you. And Batul, post-U.S. attacks on Iran's nuclear sites, the Iranian parliament passed a law to task, and Reza mentioned this earlier, the Supreme National Security Council with dealing with the IAEA and inspections and cooperation. And Abbas Araghchi said this has been explicitly even acknowledged in this new document, that the cooperation with the agency will take place within the framework of this new law and in full coordination with Iran's Supreme National Security Council. So if the U.S. and IAEA were looking for perhaps post those 12 days aggression and the Israelis beleaguered Iran and submission or subjugation, they're receiving exactly the opposite. I'm glad that Reza mentioned the JCPOA was the best deal that there was, that they were going to arrive at. And it seems like when Trump opted out, you very well remember, he thought that Iran was going to come begging on its knees for a new agreement. And it seems like everything from the Europeans and from the US since then, including the machinations with the IAEA, have been to try to get Iran to come back and take a less of a deal than what was offered in the JCPOA. And while Iran has always welcomed diplomacy and talks, it's always rejected and continues to reject coming into talks from a position of weakness and succumbing to pressure and coercion.
Iran can take certain steps, as you mentioned, like handing over the nuclear file completely to the Iranian National Security Council or the parliament that can dictate the direction of negotiation on the highest levels of what serves the national security of Iran holistically. But even if new agreements related to these inspections are agreed between the two sides, it remains very clear that the IAEA is unreliable, simply for one reason, because matters are not in its hands. It moves according to American directives. So no matter what is agreed, it remains that Iran needs to be very wary and constantly have its guard up and have a lack of trust. That is ultimately the supreme wisest decision that Iran can take, is just have zero trust in the other side. And the basis, obviously, of negotiation and diplomacy is to trust the other side, which is where it falls foul here, because matters will not change in the near term. It's not expected for Iran to be deceived again, i.e. it should not be deceived again, although it is not understood why Iran is going in the direction of negotiations in the first place, since if a war was to occur, nothing will stop it. It's not like these negotiations will soften the prospect of a war if that is what is being planned. The decision for war will be determined by the American and Israeli strategy for the region, and it's not linked to the IAEA. The IAEA will be used as a cover for it. So Iran, when it agrees to continuing these negotiations, it is within this direction of supporting a certain decision taken that, Iran has no military intents to build a nuclear weapon, but it knows that these negotiations won't lead to any real results, except if the West, for its own interests, wanted to stop its offensive aggression on Iran as a result of some kind of settlement that they have reached, or if they want to acknowledge the reality of Iran's strength on the ground, because the power balance of war imposes itself and cannot be overcome. So by reducing the pressure through such organizations that are intended in the first place for Iran to reach certain objectives far from the given subject that the negotiations are based on, that is nuclear, because we know it has nothing to do with the nuclear file, and we know that the IAEA is unable to give any sort of guarantees that a military strike will not occur, because the decisions are controlled by America and Israel and not the IAEA, which is simply used as a title and a front for dealing with Iran. So the subject of security and guarantees in not striking militarily is with America and Israel. We saw in June when the strike occurred, they were based on files that were completely fabricated and deceptively presented by the IAEA, and when Iran was directly negotiating with America. So we should never lose sight of that context.
I want to appreciate you both and thank you both for joining us on our program. Time has gotten the better of us. Reza Bidadi, academic and researcher and author, joining us. Also, Batul Subaiti, activist and political analyst, both joining us out of London. And viewers, you bet. And viewers, this brings us to the end of your Press TV Spotlight program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.